This is Lesson 14 of Module 8. In this lesson, we will discuss various ways that we can address risks. Collectively, these are known as risk mitigation strategies. We will also discuss the NIST Cyber Risk Scoring System, or CRS, and the CISA National Cyber Incident Scoring System, or NCISS. Now for a few administrative comments. First of all, I hope you all had a safe and restful spring break. I have finished grading the fill-in-the-blank questions from Exam 1 and your scores are posted. There was one mistake that was pointed out to me in the final, and I've gone through and corrected scores for individuals that had answered it correctly but who did not receive credit for it. Both parts of homework number 1 have now been graded and the scores for it also posted. I have not completed the grading of paper number 1 but should finish those soon. This week there is only one lesson posted. The review session on Tuesday will include an introduction of the final project for the semester. Make sure you attend this session, or if you miss it, be sure to download the slides for it. The assignment for homework number 2 will be posted this week. It is not due until Friday, 3 April by 11:59 p.m., so you have some time. The objectives for this lesson include the ability for students to be able to list the major risk mitigation strategies and to be able to describe each and the benefits of each. Students should also be able to describe the NIST Cyber Risk Scoring System and what can be taken away from it that might be useful in helping an organization score its risks. Finally, you should know how the NCISS is used to prioritize national incident handling efforts within the U.S. The videos whose links appear on this slide address risk mitigation strategies in general and not cybersecurity specifically. Having said this, they equally apply to cybersecurity risk management, however. Notice the diagram included on this slide. The image shows the general risk strategies that you will see when anybody talks about risk mitigation strategies. You will want to take a look at these two videos at some point, either now or later. In the first video, 4 strategies are mentioned. These are fairly standard approaches to handling risks. The second video listed 7 strategies. 4 of them are basically the same. Risk acceptance, which means we describe the risk as unlikely or too small to worry about. Risk reduction, which means we do something to reduce the likelihood of the risk event occurring. Risk transfer, which means we shift the responsibility to somebody else, generally an insurance company. And risk avoidance, which involves eliminating the activity that introduces the risk. At the same time, the second video includes 3 strategies the first video didn't. The first is reduce the impact, which is not the same as reducing the risk. Instead, we do something that will reduce the potential impact of the event, not the likelihood of the event occurring. The second is an interesting one, a strategy that you don't often see expressed in this way. The strategy was to have a plan B. In other words, come up with a plan for what you will do if the risk event occurs, presumably a plan that will reduce the impact of the event. As the video doesn't go into any detail on their strategies, it is not really clear how this is different from the reducing the impact strategy. And the third is to escalate the risk to higher management. This really is not addressing the risk as such, but rather turning the decision of what to do over to somebody else. This might be a strategy for the security individual conducting the risk analysis, but it isn't a strategy for the organization as a whole. From the video, Risk Mitigation Strategies, the 5 Best Approaches, for which a link has been provided at the end of the lesson, we can learn about their 5 proposed methods of addressing risks. It is important to note that again, this video discusses the mitigation strategies in general and not specifically from a cybersecurity perspective. In fact, this video addresses risks as they pertain to projects your organization may be attempting to complete, project management. As such, it addresses risks that could impact the cost of the project, the planned schedule in which to accomplish the project, and the resulting performance of the completed project. In other words, does it do what you had wanted the project to accomplish? Looking at the strategies listed from this video, we can see that for the most part they are the same as strategies we've seen before. There are two exceptions. The first one that is a bit different is controlling risk, as we have not seen a strategy worded in this way. Interestingly enough, the description of this approach is to take actions to mitigate or eliminate the consequences of the risk, so it is really the same as risk mitigation or possibly risk reduction from our previous examples. The second is monitor and observe risk. This really isn't addressing the risk other than possibly accepting the risk and hoping things don't get out of hand. This may be an appropriate strategy for project management, but is probably not the best approach for cybersecurity. We can, as mentioned, just accept the risk, but that is only done when the impact is considered to be so low that the cost of mitigating it in some way is higher than the impact should it occur. We also accept risks if the chance of the risk is considered so low that it is deemed highly unlikely to occur, but then this has to be done as we can also consider the impact should it actually occur. If the impact is to a mission essential function, then we might not want to take this strategy. If we do accept a risk, then it is not a bad idea to monitor for the risk actually occurring if it is possible to spot it developing before the impact actually occurs. It is time to turn to a video specifically covering risk mitigation for cybersecurity risks. The speaker is Robert Gordon, who was the Executive Director of the Canadian Cyber Threat Exchange when the video was created in 2020. He doesn't list a number of strategies in this video, but rather talks about some specific risks organizations may encounter and possible approaches to addressing them. Take some time to watch this video now or later after you finish this lesson. If you search specifically for cybersecurity risk mitigation, you will find a number of articles, as well as videos such as the one we just watched, that do not address mitigation strategies that would be applied to risks you find during a risk assessment, but rather general recommendations for things that would lower your overall risk to possible attacks in general. Here is a list from one such article. Notice that the first strategy that they mention is to conduct a risk assessment. After that, however, they don't discuss how to mitigate the specific risks that you found during that assessment. The items they list are not bad ideas. They just don't address strategies to mitigate specific risks that you identify when conducting a risk assessment. Continuing on the line of the video and last article, here's a list from NSA of their top 10 mitigation strategies which, again, are good ideas but do not address how to approach individual risks identified during a risk assessment. I do have to give credit to NSA for this list, however, as they point out which of the NIST cybersecurity framework core functions each of their suggestions address. Here is the entire list from NSA. It is important to note that the introduction to their list tells us that the list will help counter a broad range of techniques used by advanced persistent threats or APTs, which actually may not be a large threat for many small organizations. 1. Update and upgrade software immediately. 2. Defend privileges and accounts. 3. Assign signed software execution policies. Or exercise a system recovery plan. 5. Actively manage systems and configurations. 6. Continuously hunt for network intrusions. 7. Leverage modern hardware security features. 8. Segregate networks using application-aware defenses. 9. Integrate threat reputation services. And 10. Transition to multi-factor authentication. These are all great ideas that could help an organization's cybersecurity program and status. We've discussed several of these in the past, such as numbers 1, 4, and 5. Not all of these are going to be things that an organization that is just starting out will be able to implement immediately, however. I would like to point out one that we also have seen several times and that should be considered by organizations of any size. Number 10, transition to multi-factor authentication is a particularly good idea, and an organization can start with two-factor authentication. This is especially important in today's environment where many employees actually work from home. Back to my desire to involve steps for each of the CSF core functions, NSA has mapped these as mentioned in the previous slide, and if all of these strategies are implemented, each of the core functions will have at least two methods that could be attributed to them, at least in part. Here is one final list we will look at of general risk mitigation strategies. You can find a number of others on the internet with any number of strategies listed. Some of the items in this list overlap with some other lists we have looked at, but there is one in particular I want to point out on this list. Number 4, get rid of unwanted hardware. You don't want to have systems hanging around on your network that are running old versions of operating systems and applications. If the system is not being used, get rid of it. It can become a point of entry into your network. We might modify this item just slightly and say instead, get rid of unwanted or unused hardware and software. There are some good strategies here for any organization to follow to eliminate general risks to the organization. For some organizations, this may in fact be a good place to start. While all of the strategies we've looked at in the video on cybersecurity and risk mitigation, as well as the cybersecurity risk mitigation strategies from the articles in the previous few slides, are important, and following them will help improve an organization's cybersecurity posture, they aren't part of the process we've tried to identify this semester for risk management. Let's return to looking at risk mitigation in the way that it applies to risk management strategies and frameworks. The article identified on this slide lists 5 steps for cybersecurity risk mitigation. They are: 1. Identifying the risks. Before you can begin to mitigate an organization's risks, you have to first identify what the risks are. 2. Assessing risks. Once you know what the risks are, you need to quantify the risks so you know exactly how much of a risk and impact each actually is. 3. Prioritizing certain risks. Once you've been able to quantify the risks, you can come up with a prioritized list of the most important risks that the organization needs to address with some mitigation strategy. Applying a strategy to a risk will change the risk score for it, which will allow you to place it in a new prioritized list to see what needs to be handled next. Remember that applying security controls is a form of risk mitigation. This is important to remember and understand. 4. Monitoring risks. Risk factors can change due to a number of factors, so you need to make sure that you are monitoring your systems to be sure that a risk you thought you had mitigated suddenly doesn't pop up due to some new factor such as a change in technology or a newly developed exploit. 5. Implementation and adjustments. Once you have a plan for your security to include your mitigation strategies, you need to implement them. One might argue that this step actually occurs before step 4, monitoring, but we won't get too picky about this. Applying all that we have looked at and learned this semester to these basic steps is what needs to be done for your team project. For the team projects, when you identify risks for the organization, let's utilize these basic 4 strategies to address them. 1. Risk avoidance. Is it possible to eliminate the risk by eliminating the process or function that is introducing the risk without impacting the critical mission of the organization? An example of this might be an organization that allows employees to download and run software on their systems. Doing this introduces the possibility of downloading malware. Do employees really need to be able to do this? If not, don't allow them to and avoid the risk altogether. 2. Risk acceptance. This is the easiest approach to take to risk mitigation, but it will often not be the wisest. Is the risk so unlikely or the impact so small as to make any other strategy too costly to implement? For example, trying to negate the possibility of an advanced persistent threat is going to be very hard and costly, but what is the chance of an APT targeting the organization's system in the first place? Would the cost of reducing or eliminating a risk exceed the potential loss if the risk event should occur? If so, you may just want to accept the risk. 3. Risk reduction. Can you modify a process or add additional hardware or software to reduce the impact or likelihood of a risk? An example of this might be reducing the risk of a security breach through password guessing by introducing multi-factor authentication. Or risk transfer. Can the risk be transferred to somebody else? For example, ransomware is a frequent problem for organizations of different sizes. Can the organization purchase insurance that would cover a potential loss of responding to ransomware? When going this route, organizations need to be very careful before signing onto a policy. Will the coverage be sufficient for the potential loss? Are there exclusions in the policy that would eliminate certain coverage the organization was planning on? Read the policy very carefully. These are some basic approaches to mitigating risks that can be utilized by organizations of any size. They are also conceptually easy to understand and to explain to management. Having said that, however, identifying risk reduction steps you can take may not always be easy, as they can become very technical. For organizations just starting out, it is more likely that some basic security controls can greatly reduce risks to a level they can accept. You may come across something referred to as the NIST Cyber Risk Scoring Solution, or CRS. You can find a presentation on it explaining a bit more about it, and there is a link for this in the assigned and optional reading assignment slide. Displayed here is a slide from the presentation describing the purpose of the CRS. Notice that it is all about addressing, understanding, and managing risks. Here is a slide of the inputs to their solution, which go to the system known as Archer. Archer is used to prioritize security and privacy control assessments, manage ANA and significant change schedules where ANA is assessment and authorization, track accepted risks and POA&M milestones, where POA&M stands for Plan of Action and Milestones, generate security and privacy documentation, and provide compliance and vulnerability scan results in near real time. Here are the outputs of the CRS via a system known as Tableau. Notice the cybersecurity framework dashboard mentioned, which is in the circle at the top right of the diagram. Tableau will allow users to view risk at multiple organization levels, integrate vulnerability data into risk scoring, drill down into specific assets and their current vulnerability exposures, respond to data calls quickly with details such as CVEs and affected assets, and analyze risks against the cybersecurity framework. If you recall, we have discussed several times the importance of knowing what the organization's mission essential functions are and what systems and data are needed to ensure the operation of these functions. In this slide, we see NIST also discussing this as well. Then, as we have also discussed, NIST mentions the importance of understanding the likelihood a weakness will be exploited and what the impact might be if it is. The rest of this slide shows the process they go through to accomplish all of this. This slide outlines the method NIST goes through in calculating a risk score. Notice that they use a quantitative approach as opposed to a qualitative. We've mentioned the issue with this is coming up with the numbers that are actually accurate enough to provide a reasonable and realistic value. So we might ask how they come up with their values. The answer to this is shown in the description column, where they describe the three variables they use. Notice that their three variables do not rely on any sort of external measurement or test, but rather on questionnaires and an analysis of the importance of the controls to security. This slide provides more details on how the risk score is calculated. While the slide provides a bit more detail on the calculation, it still is missing a lot of information that would be needed to be able to mimic the method NIST is using. Unlike what you will be doing this semester with your organization, which is basically a single engagement, NIST recognizes the ongoing nature of risk management and the importance of continuous monitoring. This slide speaks to this aspect of their CRS. ISCM stands for Information Security Continuous Monitoring, and OA, as shown on this slide, is Ongoing Authorization. Some other acronyms that appear here are SAR, which is a Security Assessment Report, SAP, which stands for System Applications and Products. Don't get this mixed up with Special Access Programs, which also has the same acronym. PAP, which is a Policy Administration Point, and PAR, which is a Performance and Accountability Report. Ultimately, all of this information and analysis leads to a series of dashboards which result from the CRS. Let's take a look at a few of these to just get a feel for the type of information NIST's program provides. The first one is the Enterprise System Security Dashboard. You can see in this display the use of both quantitative numbers, but also the liberal use of the colors red, orange, and green to help a user more quickly focus in on what is important. This is really a blending of quantitative and qualitative schemes. We won't look at all of the possible dashboards, but let's look at a few to understand the type of things NIST considers important for users in charge of security for their systems and network. Here is a vulnerability trend dashboard. In this example, it shows that the trend is a lowering of the number of vulnerabilities. Not only is this important, but this dashboard would allow the user to quickly see if there had been a spike, which might call for an increased analysis and investigation. Knowing you are trending downward is important, but what are the current remaining vulnerabilities? This display highlights them so that they can be evaluated and a determination made as to what needs to be done about them and which to possibly focus on first. There are several more dashboards providing a view of different aspects of cybersecurity that would be important to an administrator, but we will finish with just this one last dashboard. You know of my appreciation for the NIST Cybersecurity Framework core functions. The dashboard shows the organization's performance in terms of the 5 core functions of the CSF. Remember that this presentation was from a few years ago, before version 2.0 of the CSF was released, thus the reason for the 5 versus 6 core functions. The presentation the screen captures were from provided just a glimpse of the NIST CRS. I contacted the individuals who made this presentation and asked if there was more guidance on their solution. I received the following reply. So I hope nobody got too excited about the solution. and the dashboards, as NIST is only sharing information on the CRS with other federal government agencies. So why include this section in the lesson? Well, there are a few things that you might gather from what we covered. First, the rough method that they use to calculate the risk score, specifically what they used as variables in their calculation. The same variables can be used by you in your own efforts, though you will have to come up with your own questionnaires, but there are many questionnaires in the public domain that could be adapted to this purpose. Second, the type of things that appear in their various dashboards. These are the types of things that organizations need to know on an ongoing basis and what your organization should ultimately be shooting for. And finally, the use of both quantitative and qualitative values in the displays. Ultimately, it is much more useful to folks, especially those just starting out, if they can view their status in terms of red, orange, green displays, for example. They won't know what the numbers mean with a quantitative approach and whether the numbers provided are good or bad. Does everything need to be at 100 or 0, depending on what the number represents, or is 75 or 25 good enough? Using a red, orange, green display scheme is much easier. It's a much easier way to provide information on the status of an organization's systems and network that will be more quickly understood by users and especially managers. Just one other comment. For those who might be looking for an area of research, this might be one that you could pursue. The whole risk assessment process is one which could use a lot of automated support. A tool or method that would help accomplish a risk assessment would be of great help to the community, one that could be broadly made available instead of keeping it internal to an organization such as NIST. I want to spend a few minutes now on another government effort. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, known as CISA, National Cyber Incident Scoring System, or NCISS. The system was based on NIST Special Publication 800-61 Rev 2, whose title is Computer Security Incident Handling Guide. Rev 2 was released in 2012. Revision 3 of the document was released in April 2025. It takes a different approach to things, as the title, Incident Response Recommendations and Considerations for Cybersecurity Risk Management, implies. This document in its subtitle proclaims to be a CSF 2.0 community profile. The purpose of this document, according to CISA, is explained on their website. Quote, many incident taxonomies and classification schemes provide excellent guidance within the scope of a single enterprise's security operations center, or SOC. However, such systems do not address incident prioritization or risk assessment from a nationwide perspective, which may involve large numbers of diverse enterprises. Large-scale national cybersecurity operations centers, such as the one at CISA, need to assess risk while accommodating a diverse set of private critical infrastructure asset owners and operators and U.S. government departments and agencies. The National Cyber Incident Scoring System is designed to provide a repeatable and consistent mechanism for estimating the risk of an incident in this context. End quote. CISA goes on to state, quote, NCISS uses a weighted arithmetic mean to produce a score from 0 to 100. This score drives CISA incident triage and escalation processes and assists in determining the prioritization of limited incident response resources and the necessary level of support for each incident. End quote. I'd like to, in particular, call your attention to the last comment, as you don't often hear CISA admit to having only limited resources, but it is very true. Normally, they will discuss their offerings or the assistance they can provide without commenting on the fact that they are indeed limited. This means if you are a small community not considered to be critically important to the nation, if a major incident occurs, you are likely to not receive any direct support from CISA. You need to be able to handle the situation locally in terms of the incident's impact on your community. I mentioned that the NCISS uses a weighted arithmetic mean to arrive at a score between 0 and 100. This is based on a variety of categories or items pertinent to incident response and management. Each category has a weight, and the response to each category has an associated score. The categories are shown here: functional impact, observed activity, location of observed activity, actor characterization, information impact, recoverability, cross-sector dependency, and potential impact. Each response score is multiplied by the category weight, and the weighted scores are summed. You then calculate the minimum possible weighted score sum and subtract this number from the previously calculated sum of the weighted scores. Divide the result by the range, the difference between the maximum possible weighted score sum and the minimum possible weighted score sum. Finally, multiply the resulting fraction by 100 to produce the final result. Remember that the weights and values are specific to an individual organization's risk assessment process. After calculating the weighted arithmetic mean, the score will be used to determine the priority level for the incident. The priority levels are emergency, black. An emergency priority incident poses an imminent threat to the provision of wide-scale critical infrastructure services, national government stability, or the lives of U.S. persons. Severe, or red, a severe priority incident is likely to result in a significant impact to public health or safety, national security, economic security, foreign relations, or civil liberties. High, or orange, a high priority incident is likely to result in a demonstrable impact to public health or safety, national security, economic security, foreign relations, civil liberties, or public confidence. Medium, or yellow, a medium priority incident may affect public health or safety, national security, economic security, foreign relations, civil liberties, or public confidence. Low, or green, a low priority incident is unlikely to affect public health or safety, national security, economic security, foreign relations, civil liberties, or public confidence. Baselines, let's talk about them. A baseline priority incident is highly unlikely to affect public health or safety, national security, economic security, foreign relations, civil liberties, or public confidence. The bulk of incidents will likely fall into the baseline priority level, with many of them being routine data losses or incidents that may be immediately resolved. However, some incidents may require closer scrutiny, as they may have the potential to escalate after additional research is completed. In order to differentiate between these two types of baseline incidents, the NCISS separates baseline incidents into baseline minor, or blue, and baseline negligible, or white. Baseline minor, or blue, priority incidents is an incident that is highly unlikely to affect public health or safety, national security, economic security, foreign relations, civil liberties, or public confidence. The potential for impact, however, exists and warrants additional security. A baseline negligible, or white, priority incident is an incident that is highly unlikely to affect public health or safety, national security, economic security, foreign relations, civil liberties, or public confidence. It is possible that an incident will actually consist of a number of individual incidents or attacks. This situation is referred to as multiple connected incidents. Currently, when a series of connected incidents or a campaign is evaluated, the overall campaign is given the same priority level as the highest mark of any incident that is a component of the campaign. There exists the possibility that a campaign may have a more significant total impact than the highest individual component incident. To take into account incident aggregation, When determining the score for the campaign, the final priority level will be raised to the next level if 3 or more component incidents have the same high score. For example, if a campaign has 3 low or green priorities and 2 baseline or minor component incidents, the overall campaign would be set to a medium yellow priority level. There are a variety of ways used to determine the score for each of the categories. One of particular interest and importance is the location of the observed activity. This category describes where the observed activity was detected in the network. The options for observed activity are based on a modified version of the Purdue Enterprise Reference Architecture. A flexible set of definitions was chosen for this category because each affected organization will generally have a different perspective on what systems are mission critical. The location of observed activity is likely to change during the course of an incident and should be updated as new information becomes available. The defined levels are Level 0 unsuccessful. This means that existing network defenses repelled all observed safe activity. Level 1 business demilitarized zone. In this case, the activity was observed in the business network's demilitarized zone, or DMZ. These systems are generally not trusted and are designed to be exposed to the internet. A common example of this would be the organization's web server or email server. Level 2 business network. This level means that the activity was observed in the business or corporate network of the organization. These systems would include corporate user workstations, application servers, and other non-core management systems. Level 3, business network management. In this case, the activity was observed in business network management systems such as administrative user workstations, Active Directory servers, or other more critical systems. Level 4, critical systems DMZ. We are increasing now in the level of criticality for attacked systems, though we have not arrived at mission essential systems yet. In this case, activity was observed in the DMZ that exists often between the business network and a critical system network. These systems may be internally facing services such as a SharePoint site or financial system. Level 5, critical system management. For this level, activity was observed on high-level critical systems management, such as human-machine interfaces in industrial control systems. Not every organization will have industrial control systems, so this level may not apply. Level 6, critical systems. For both IT and OT networks, there will be systems that are considered mission critical. Having said this, CISA is focused on systems that will have an impact on the nation's critical infrastructures. Their definition for this level is activity observed in the critical systems that operate critical processes such as programmable logic controllers in industrial control system environments, which are seen in many of the critical infrastructure sectors. Level 7, safety systems. Again, not all organizations will have systems that fall into this category, but the sector CISA is most interested in will likely have systems that fall into the category. This level applies when activity was observed in critical safety systems that ensure the safe operation of an environment. One example of a critical safety system that might be found in both IT and OT networks is a fire suppression system. One final possibility, though it is not given a level number, is unknown, which simply means activity was observed, but the network segment could not be identified. Let's take a look at the two versions of NIST SP 800-61. The two are quite a bit different. The title of Revision 2 is Computer Security Incident Handling Guide, and it describes how you can set up an incident response capability in your organization. Rev 2 splits the discussion into 3 sections. The first section describes how to organize a computer security incident response capability and covers developing appropriate policies and plans, as well as the structure of your incident response team. The second section describes the handling of an incident and covers preparation, detection, and analysis, containment, eradication, and recovery, and post-incident activity. The final section covers coordination with entities that might help in your incident response and discusses information sharing, as it is recognized that sharing information about an incident with others might help them prevent a similar incident on their systems. The title of Revision 3 is Incident Response Recommendations and Considerations for Cybersecurity Risk Management. As the subtitle indicates, this document is tightly tied to CSF 2.0. As a refresher, NIST describes a community profile as a baseline of CSF outcomes created and published to address shared interests and goals for reducing cybersecurity risk among a number of organizations. A community profile is typically developed for a particular sector, subsector, technology, threat type, or other use case. SP 800-61 Rev 3 defines NIST's CSF 2.0 community profile for cyber incident risk management. What the document does is to pick out the elements of the CSF that pertain to incident management. The idea is that if you want to implement a robust incident management program, you would implement the elements that address incident management in some way. It divides the elements into two categories, listing the elements in two tables. The first table covers the preparation and lessons learned category, which includes elements from the govern, identify, and protect core functions, and incident response, which includes elements from detect, respond, and recover core functions. You may recall this diagram from before in a previous lesson, which is included in SP 800-61 Rev 3 and illustrates the incident response life cycle. Here is a screen capture of a portion of Table 2 covering the preparation and lessons learned aspect of incident management. This table includes the elements from govern, identify, and protect core functions. Notice the description of the first four elements mentioned here. These might not be initially considered to be incident response in nature. Notice the notes section, which tells you to see the notes for the protect core function in the table. There are three short notes that explains why elements such as these are included as requirements for incident management. The first note states that lowering the number of incidents shortens operational disruptions, allows response teams to focus on high impact situation, and reduces the impact of incidents that do occur, for example, by making it harder for attackers to move laterally throughout an environment and thus slowing them down. The second note explains that understanding the protection mechanisms in place can help personnel deploy methods to detect protection failures and bypasses. The third note mentions that it is outside of the scope of 861 R3 to provide recommendations and considerations on protecting assets other than a few notes of practices that specifically benefit incident response activities. Now that we understand why protection elements such as the ones shown here are included, let's look at the last item in this excerpt from the larger table. This one is definitely one that directly applies to incident response. As the notes for the entry explains, backups are very important to the recovery process in an incident if the integrity or availability of data has been impacted. In summary, both of the revs for 800-61 are valuable. Which you might use depends on how you approach the overall security program for an organization. If you are concentrating on the CSF and its core functions, then Rev 3 is probably the way you want to go. If you have a small organization that is not going to have a robust security program to start with, you might consider Rev 2, as they will need to have some capability to respond to an incident. The two documents are actually not mutually exclusive, and you can use both of them to help an organization. The obvious additions to our list of useful documents that we should be collecting for our library are the 2 documents on incident handling and response. For this lesson, there are 3 required videos which were mentioned earlier in the lesson. There are also 4 required reading assignments and 1 PDF file of a NIST presentation on cyber risk scoring. 2 of the readings are Rev 2 and Rev 3 of NIST SP 800-61. Skim these. There's also an optional 20-minute video on risk mitigation strategies. Time for a quick knowledge review. Which of the following risk mitigation strategies would obtaining insurance fall into? Risk avoidance, risk acceptance, risk transfer, or risk reduction? The answer to this question is risk transfer. Which of the following risk mitigation strategies is the easiest one to implement, but may not be the wisest choice? Risk avoidance, risk acceptance, risk transfer, or risk reduction? The answer to this question is risk acceptance. Controlling risk was offered as an approach to mitigating risk. Which of the following risk mitigation strategies is this closest to? Risk avoidance, risk acceptance, risk transfer, or risk reduction? The answer to this question is risk reduction. Which of the following is true in terms of the risk mitigation strategy of escalating as presented in the lesson? It is effective because it elevates the decision-making to management where the cost-benefit analysis is directed. It makes the risk decision a joint decision between management and technical staff. Or this really does not address the risk as such, but rather turns the decision of what to do over to somebody else. The answer to this question is this really does not address the risk as such, but rather turns the decision of what to do over to somebody else. This concludes Lesson 14 in Module 8. This also concludes Module 8.